This information session will cover this year's 2023 Racial and Economic Justice Fund and Future Fund here at Bread and Roses. What we're up to today is giving you all a little bit of background about Bread and Roses, how we work, who's eligible for our funding, our donor organizing work that Andriana will cover for us, how we here at Bread and Roses define community organizing, the specific eligibility criteria for the two funds we're here to talk about, the Racial and Economic Justice Fund, which you will probably hear us call REJ, and the Future Fund. We're going to walk you through the logistics of how to apply, and we'll talk to you about what will happen with your application materials after you submit them, should you choose to apply. If you have questions while I'm talking, please feel free to either unmute and ask them, or raise your virtual hand or raise your physical hand, and we will try to keep on top of seeing if folks have questions while we're going. And there will be plenty of time for questions at the end as well. So Bread and Roses, we were founded in the early 70s, originally called the People's Fund, and we were originally a collective of folks who were pooling their money together, and every person who put money in was helping to decide where the money was going. Always a focus on social justice issues and community organizing, collective action. I think we might be blessed with the presence of someone who was around in that era on this call, so appreciate we're standing on the shoulders of giants here, and I'm always happy to hear from folks who are around before I was. The People's Fund then applied. They originally were just, that pooled funds. They were not a 501c3, and they did eventually decide to become a 501c3 so that folks could deduct their contributions to the organization. If you ever see us in person, ask us the story of the first 501c3 application under the People's Fund and why it didn't get approved by the IRS, and hence the regrouping and renaming as the Bread and Roses Community Fund, which has been around, again, since the early 70s. So since then, we have been supporting movements and their leaders by organizing donors, right? Getting folks together to pool their money and move it toward collective action, and using community-led processes to make the decisions about where that money will move. In order to receive funding from Bread and Roses Community Fund, organizations must be located and working in either Philadelphia proper, Camden County, or the collar counties around Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And organizations must either be a 501c3 or they must have a fiscal sponsor who is a 501c3. If you have received a grant from Bread and Roses before, in order to qualify for a new grant, you need to have submitted all of the grant reports that you owe us before we'll give you another grant. Rest assured, if you have not yet been a Bread and Roses grantee, that we try to keep our reporting requirements light and unonerous. We really just want to hear how things went during the time that you had funding from us. And then the last general eligibility criteria is that you must submit a complete application, and you must submit it on time. So you'll see later in the slides, we'll go through the software that we use to collect applications. It's an online software, and the submit button will disappear at midnight the day after the due date. So please plan to push the button well before midnight, so that you don't run into a technical problem and not be able to submit on time. As I mentioned before, all of the funding at Bread and Roses goes to folks who are using community organizing to create systems change. So oftentimes the way I talk about that is you need to be taking collective action, right? So it needs to be a group of folks, and the action that you are taking together needs to be changing something that it will help people who are outside of your group. That's how we know it's a systems level change. So you're taking collective action, and that action is moving the needle, shifting power for folks beyond the group that is your collective. to qualify for our funding, folks have to have a clear understanding of the root causes of what they're working on. And they need to be, again, working to shift those root causes and change the systems level issues. As I said before, you know, you could be doing systems change, really great systems change work as an individual, but that work wouldn't qualify. The work needs to be happening from a base of folks taking collective action. Your systems change target needs to be at the systemic level. It can be neighborhood, city, state, national. It can be at a system like the school district, again, like any system where the change will influence folks beyond your base. And also your base, the leadership of your base needs to be primarily folks who are most affected by the problem or issue that you are working on. I see that there are some folks with their hands raised. Anja, or tell me if I'm saying your name wrong. Well, please feel free to ask your question.
Hi, good morning. It's pronounced Anya.
Anya.
It's okay. No one would have ever guessed that right on the first time. It's spelled kind of weird. I'm calling from Project Always Receiving. I'm the founder. I just want to know, because we literally just had got started with our 501c3. We're still like waiting on our documentation, but we're legit. We're just waiting.
Great. Yeah. So let's have a conversation. Lucas and I can touch base with you offline to understand where you are in your process. The short answer is, if you have a response back from the IRS that your application is pending, I think that will work. If not, we can work on connecting you with the fiscal sponsor for this round of application. And if your 501c3 comes in before grants go out, we can figure out how to disperse. But let's, Lucas, will you drop in the chat, send us an email at grants@breadrosesfund.org, and we can work through the specifics with you, but we can work it out, no problem. And then you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for being here. And Noah, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for hosting this. So I just have a quick question about eligibility in terms of geography.
Sure.
I worked for Tight-Lipped, which is a national organization, but we also have community members, volunteers, team members, and work in Philly and in a couple of different counties in Pennsylvania. And so I'm wondering if you find work that, like, we only have 2 staff members and they're not based in Pennsylvania, but our work is mostly remote and virtual and national. And one of the places where we have a community and we are organizing is in Pennsylvania.
And is some of the system change work you're doing in one of the counties that we talked about?
Yeah.
So I think that should work. Yeah, I think that should work. We do have some grantees who are national organizations that have Philadelphia chapters.
Right. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah,
that's exactly.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Those are the 2 hands I saw. Does anyone else want to ask a question before I keep talking? Beautiful. Okay. Again, anytime, not your last chance. All right, so that was a good time to pause for questions, because those were the overarching eligibility criteria. I do want to dig a little bit deeper into what we mean when we say community organizing here at Bread and Roses. We have a very specific definition. It may not be your definition. That's okay, but you have to meet our definition to qualify. So when we say community organizing, what we mean, and just to let you all know, when I say we in this context, I mean the broader community of Bread and Roses. So all of our grant making criteria were set by our community, which is, movement organizers. So we've had multiple long input processes with the community, and these are the outputs of those. So it's not staff. I don't mean staff when I say we here. I mean the Bread and Roses organizing community writ large. And so our collective definition of community organizing is, again, collective action in groups of folks working together, working to shift power between folks who hold more power and folks who hold less power, working to make changes in policies and practices at a level, again, that will create change for the broader community beyond the base. Some examples of what qualifies as community organizing are on the right here in red: civil disobedience, showing up for mass protests, organizing them, mobilizing your base to speak their truth to power, mobilizing your base to push folks who are in public office to create change. A couple more examples: hosting town halls and figuring out what that collective need is of the folks who are most impacted by the problem you're trying to solve. Training your base to show up and disrupt, providing space for political education for your base so that they can understand the systems that need to change to fix the problem that they're impacted by. Those are some of the examples of what we mean by community organizing. I can talk through some examples of specific things that Bread and Roses does not fund. So we don't fund direct service or social service, no self-help or self-empowerment. We don't fund education or research. We don't fund schools. We don't pay for capital campaigns. That means hard infrastructure. So we don't pay for folks to build buildings or, buy computers, and we don't fund individuals. We don't do scholarships or fellowships except for one specific scholarship that we run, which isn't open right now, but we could talk about more if you're curious. One thing I do want to make clear here is that all Bread and Roses funding is general operating funding. So if you are doing some sort of direct service work or a small piece of some of this as part of your base building, it doesn't disqualify you. But if this is the main dish, the bread and butter of your work, then this doesn't qualify. The heart of your work needs to be that collective action towards systems change to qualify for Bread and Roses funding. So that is just a broad overview of who we are and what we're up to in the big picture. And I'm going to pass to my colleague, Andriana, to talk to you about another piece of our work, which is our donor organizing.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. So a large part of our donor organizing here at Bread and Roses is through a model which is called the Giving Project. The Giving Project was brought to us by one of our sister funds and colleagues out in Seattle called the Social Justice Fund. And it's really an opportunity for folks to engage in a cross-race, cross-class, multi-ethnic, gender diverse collective project where we put together about a group of, I would say, 20 something odd strangers, again, who are diverse in those identities that I previously named, but who also share a vision for social justice and want to be able to apply their time, their talent, and their resources to support grassroots organizations in the greater Philadelphia region working for racial and social change. Giving projects run a course on average of about 6 months. And in that period of time, there's about maybe 10 to 12 sessions or trainings where folks will be engaged in political education training. There is other collective skill set training such as fundraising and grant making. And ultimately, it is the Giving Project group that will be fundraising the actual money that is eventually broken out into $10,000 grant increments. And then that group is the one who ultimately decide which organizations they would like to award the money to based upon those who applied. It is truly a community-led decision-making process. So myself, Karen, and our supervisor, Nigel, we are more like air traffic control. We help create the space and make sure that the flight is comfy and that it has all of the things that it needs, but it is a completely community-led decision. And we run about 3 giving projects a year. Why should you join a giving project? If you know, like, if the sell for like getting involved in the greater Philadelphia region and supporting grassroots organizations to continue to do the work that they so need to continue to do is not enough. A few other pieces. We offer free fundraising training. We have a very specific, I guess, model and framing in which we think about fundraising, and most of our projects raise on average $150,000 or more. And people are like, how do you do that? So we walk you through how we do that, and you get to be a part of that. It's also an opportunity to learn more about grant writing and grant making. A really cool thing about giving projects is that you can be in a giving project, actively like being a donor organizer in the giving project, and have an application submitted for the organization that you organize with, and apply for funding in that project at the same time. So we certainly are not like hoarding anything in any way. We're not knowledge hoarding. We're hoping that actually it's a really great way for you to learn more about what a Bread and Roses grantee application looks like, or maybe what an interview looks like. And we have a few folks in the current Racial and Economic Justice Giving Project who are doing just that. A lot of our time, we're just looking to build meaningful relationships with one another. To be alive right now is so hard. Like, things are just hard. And that's, I think, the true beauty of this project is that it is community-based, and it is about establishing relationships and acknowledging, sure, we're different in a lot of ways, but we also find lots of common threads of just lived experiences and talents and joys and skills that we all bring to the table, and how can we use those together to build something. Other pieces, you'll get to engage in discussions about race and class in a multiracial cross-class group, and just part of that, staying engaged in what's going on the ground within communities. Another important piece of this work, a lot of folks are able to connect across their organizations and support each other. You might have a neighbor who's doing work that you didn't even know, and that's a really awesome way to see folks network in that way. Yeah, and just making sure that critical movements for change continue to happen. Unfortunately, we live in a tough world, and just when we think like, oh yeah, this project, it kind of just feels like, yeah, we should definitely be doing this work, something in our world happens. We catch news of something that just reminds us why a project like this is so important, to be able to put the power back into the hands of the people. And we certainly encourage you, if you join a giving project, that you take what you learn and you apply it to your own neighborhoods and your own communities to be able to continue the work that you're doing and empower others. I can speak to the testament of friendship. Sarah and I did the Racial and Economic Justice Giving Project back in 2019, and fate loved us so much that it brought us back together, and now we get to work together. And yeah, it's just so nice to be able to welcome folks into the project that I've done. So if you have more questions, I'll be sure to stick around for the remainder of the session and drop my contact information.
Thank you, Andriana. Vouch for everything Andriana says. Giving Project is amazing. It was an amazing experience for me, and you know, we continue to appreciate all of the work that folks do, both raising money and making fundraising decisions. Do folks have any questions about the Giving Project for Andriana now? Like she said, she can stick around for that if your questions come up at the end too.
I do see a question in the chat that I might just answer out loud.
Please.
So I see a question from Priscilla Flores. And the question is, how can people participate in the Giving Project? So while we are currently currently facilitating the Racial and Economic Justice Giving Project for this year, this is one of our core projects, as well as we have a Gender Justice Giving Project, which is one of our core projects, and we host a special issue fund that can be any number of topics. We just concluded this year's special issue fund, which was the Media Justice Giving Project. Some others that we've facilitated in the past are immigration justice, environmental justice, equitable space justice. So we're not entirely sure what that topic will be for our special issue. However, if you're interested in participating in a given project, you can reach out to me via email, and I'll connect you with our team. We host one-on-ones with folks as part of our recruitment, just to share more intimate details about the project and time commitments, to see if it would be a good for you. And you could, excuse me, and you could learn more about the project that way. If you already know, like, yep, this is something I definitely want to do, we recommend that you complete our Giving Project application form. And I can drop the link to the application in the chat. It just helps us gather some more background information about you, why you're interested, what some of your own learning goals are. And for folks that do submit the application, we do follow up with them for a one-on-one as well. So at least for this year, you could look to participate in our special issue giving project, which starts in the summer, or you could participate in our gender justice giving project, which will start in the fall.
Awesome, thanks. Andrea, one more question from the chat, which is, can folks participate remotely? There's someone in New York who's wondering.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at this time, we have planned for our giving projects to be in person. We have facilitated virtual projects in the past, particularly like right in the middle of the pandemic. We're still in one, but at the height of the pandemic, all of our giving projects were virtual. We unfortunately have not figured out a method, I'm so sorry, or really kind of realize our capacity as far as like what could we do around a hybrid model. So we are going to recommend that if you are interested in being involved in a giving project, that you be in the greater Philadelphia region where you can access our office where we host our trainings.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Really appreciate you and familiarizing us with the Giving Project. Okay, so we are going to move on to talk about the two funds that are open right now for applications, and they are our Racial and Economic Justice Fund and our Future Fund. So the REJ Fund is for more established community organizing groups. It's $10,000, and it's for folks who are, who've got their base built and who are working together already toward that collective systems change. And the Future Fund is for folks who are a little bit earlier in their journey, organizations who are earlier in their journey. It's $5,000, and those grants go to folks who are either working on emerging issues or developing new organizing approaches to an existing issue. You can be doing base building in the Future Fund, but again, your long-term plan has to be that collective action towards systems change. These two are open at the same time because they are, for two distinct types of applicants, and organizations need to choose which fund they're going to apply to. So you can't apply to both REJ and Future Fund in the same year. So when we get to how to apply, you'll see that there's one application, and within that application, you need to choose which one you are applying for. And that will ask you slightly different questions because they're slightly different funds. So again, there are some overarching eligibility criteria that apply to both of the funds, and then we'll talk about the specific qualifications for each of the individual funds. So for both funds, the work needs to be led by folks who are most impacted by the problems you're trying to resolve. And the work also needs to be being pushed by, a broad membership of folks. Oftentimes how we talk about how you know whether you have a base or not is if the current folks who are really leading and holding a lot of the work of the organization rotate off or leave, or something happens to reduce their capacity. can the organization continue to be sustainable? And if the answer is yes, then you have an effective base and a broad membership. Organizations applying to both funds need to understand power, understand how power shows up in the issues that they are working to resolve. They need to be trying to challenge power imbalances, and we often talk about that being true both in the systems they're trying to change, but also in their own internal structures and organizational practices. And then another criteria for both of the funds is that the work organizations are doing might be less appealing to a traditional funder, again, particularly often because of that push against power and people who are holding power currently. So those apply to both organizations applying for the Racial and Economic Justice Fund and also organizations applying for the Future Fund. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about qualifications specifically for REJ. For applicants to qualify for the Racial and Economic Justice Fund, they have to have a long-term vision towards systems change, and they have to be engaging. They have to have a short-term plan, strategic plan, steps toward that long-term vision. And the vision needs to be one that is changing systems so that we get closer to a racially and economically just society. And again, for REJ, you must be using that community organizing, which we talked about in depth before, to achieve your interim steps and your long-term systems change. Let's see. That plan, that long-term plan that we talked about, again, has to be pushing changes in policies and practices that would create systemic shifts in racial and economic justice. And for REJ, also need to be know the REJ world of Philadelphia, understand who else is doing work similar to yours, you need to be being collaborative across movements, and understand the broader landscape of organizations working in your on the issues that you're trying to resolve. So those are the specific criteria for REJ. And then let's talk a little bit about specific criteria for Future Fund. So Future Fund is open to organizations who are new and emerging, or organizations that are new to Bread and Roses, or organizations that are established but are working on getting into that organizing space, right? So you could be an organization who has a broad base because you've been engaging with folks by providing social services for a long time, and you could be getting into this using that base of people to work on systems change, and that would qualify for Future Fund. In Future Fund, organizations can be focusing on developing their capacity and skills toward base building and collective action. So again, you don't have to have your base established, and you don't have to have that long-term plan with specific steps yet, but you need to have the plan and understand your steps, but you don't necessarily need to be working on them yet in the Future Fund. So that's the difference between REJ and Future Fund. Questions on choosing a path between those two before we hop into the logistics of how you're going to share your application information with us if you choose to apply. Okay, great. So let's hop into preparing your application. So
Sarah, one question just came in.
Oh, great.
Can you apply again? And the answer is yes.
Yes, you can apply. If you have been awarded either REJ or Future Fund previously, you can apply again. Yes, for sure. Okay, so logistics of actually applying. Now that you know you can apply, what do you need to do? My sister is a nurse, and in nursing school, I would help her study the first step in any nursing process is gather supplies. So that's what I always say. The first step in applying to Bread and Roses is gather supplies, and your supplies are you'll need your EIN if you have a 501c3, and you'll need your fiscal sponsor's EIN. If you have been around for at least a year, you'll need your financial information from last year, which is how much money you brought in and what you spent your money on. And even if you have not been around for a year, every applicant will need their current financial plan, which is where you think your money is coming from for this year and what you plan to spend it on for this year. Oops, I said this already. So you'll need your EIN if you have your own 501c3 certification. And if you have a fiscal sponsor, you need both their EIN and a letter from them saying that they are willing to serve as your fiscal sponsor. So gather all that together. You will go to Submittable. I'll show you what the Submittable homepage will look like. Actually, this is what, if you go to Submittable and you haven't used Submittable yet, it will look like this. You'll need to create an account. On our web page, you will go to either the Future Fund page or the Racial and Economic Justice Fund page, and you'll hit Apply Now. It'll take you to Submittable. Some quirks about Submittable is it will save your work, but you have to hit save. It doesn't auto save it, so you have to hit save. We often encourage folks to copy the questions out and work in a word processor and then paste them back in. It just is a little bit more easeful, but you could do it either way. We definitely encourage you to work far enough in advance that someone else can read your answers before you submit them. We're big believers over here. We practice what we preach. We pretty much never put anything out into the world that hasn't had at least 2 sets of eyes on it. It's just helpful to know whether you're making sense beyond your own head. And just to reiterate a point I made before, you will not be able to submit your application after 11:59 p.m. on the deadline, which is March 1st for this. So please make it a spacious experience for yourself and plan to hit submit far before that, so that you're not in a panic after the button disappears. Okay, so as I said, you'll go to Submittable. If you have not yet created an account, you will need to create one. We recommend you can invite collaborators once you're signed in as an individual in Submittable, but if you're working for an organization, we recommend using, using a email and password that won't get lost to time if you are not the person who applies the next time your organization applies. So this is what it will look like this is what the chart will look like when we're asking for that financial information I talked to you about. They are identical charts, and one is for last year's financials where you put where your income came from and how you spent your money. And then we'll ask you again for your plan of where your income is going to come from this year and your plan for how you're going to spend your money. So we do require folks to put the information into these tables. You can put zeros if you don't have the information, or if you don't spend any or receive any money from that category. There is also a space after both the financial information, last year's financials and this year's budget, for you to explain anything that we need to know. If you don't have financials because you're new, just put zeros into that and explain in the narrative, we're new this year. I encourage you in the space to explain after your budget to explain if you have a particularly big budget, why this $10,000 or $5,000 will matter. Someone brought up the example of being a national organization with some local work. I would encourage you to speak in that budget question of like, how much of this budget is available for the work that's happening in Bread and Roses region. Again, like I said before, our funds are general operating funds. So I would encourage you to talk about if that's particularly important and necessary for you to be able to continue doing your organizing work. Anyway, there's space for you to be able to tell us a story too about how the money moves and why it matters in your organization. We do also, as we stated before, Bread and Roses prioritizes funding groups who are led by the people who are being impacted by the problems that you're trying to solve. And one way we try to understand who is holding power and leadership in your organization is by having an organizational composition chart in our application. This is 1,000% an art and not a science of us figuring out how to get this information. But just to familiarize you with what the table will look like. In this top row where it says number of people in the organization, we ask you to put the number of staff you have if you have them, right? This is all, you can put 0 if you have no staff. Number of board people, again, if you have them, 0 if you don't. Other leadership is, folks who are holding power, making decisions. And then active members are like all of your any, like if you host rallies and people show up, or that's your whole base. So you could, active members is often an estimate, right? Both in numbers and in demographics. Andrea, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I think as you were just kind of speaking a bit more about this application, I thought it might be helpful to share from the Giving Project members' perspective, whatever information that you can provide in your organization's composition chart and in your budget, as detailed as you possibly can be, to Sarah's point about speaking about narrative and adding portions to that, help Giving Project members who don't know maybe a single thing about your organization really understand where you are organizationally. As far as the process, when you submit the application, they'll read your application, and then from there they will ultimately decide like who will move on to an interview. So long as like you hit most of the general criteria, the grant making criteria, most folks move on to an interview. However, even in the interview process, we find that sometimes folks who could be a good fit for funding just don't quite hit the mark, because not enough information was provided about where the financials are going. And I had one Giving Project member say to me once, like, we all know budgets are imaginary, and like we totally understand that, yeah, a lot of the numbers, like, they don't always pan out the way we say or we hope that they're going to, or that like certain things are tied up here and other things are tied up there. So explain that to us as detailed as you can make it and as simple as you can make it to help us make sense of these numbers. That would be super helpful. And then as clear as a picture that you can give of like who makes up your organization, so that we can understand like, yeah, okay, like they're impacted and they're also in a position of leadership. That's super helpful for them to be able to kind of get a better sense of who you are and what it is you're working on.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, it's a great point, right? So Lucas and I think of our team, our job is to like gather information from you as applicants and package it and pass it along to the community members who are making decisions. And so that's an important point, both because, know your audience. The audience is ultimately the community members, but also that matters because Lucas and I and our team, we can be really helpful to you as you put your application together, because we're not the ultimate audience for it, right? We're curators of your information and stewards of it. Okay, so to that point, again, this organization composition chart, right? Like, this is, again, a tool for you to be able to communicate with the community members who will be making decisions about who's involved in your work. And so, we're not assuming that that you necessarily have all of this information, but we're asking you to share it if you do. And again, this is an opportunity for you to paint a picture about who is participating and who's holding power in your organization. And there is both this chart and also a narrative space below it for you to be able to explain anything that, doesn't fit into the numbers, which, we're trying to give you multiple ways to paint your picture and tell your story. So that's what I wanted to walk through in terms of the logistics of Submittable. One other thing I will make clear here is that something is dinging in my headphones and I'm not sure if it's Zoom, so let me know if I should be doing something. So because there is when you go into Submittable, there is one application for both of these funds, and there is a question about, are you applying for REJ or are you applying for Future Fund? And you need to select one of those two because it will drive the questions. If you don't select one until the very end, 3 additional questions will show up that you haven't seen yet. And again, you might feel less spacious at the end of your drafting time. So when you're in Submittable, for sure, click one of those two. You can click both of them to see what the questions are, but you need to have one of them selected to be able to see the full application. So please, please, please select, and it says that in Submittable, but it's helpful to hear and see. Please select one of the 2 funds so that you can see the full complement of questions that you'll need to fill out to have a complete application. Andriana gave us a little bit of a preview of this, but let's talk about what happens after you submit. So you've gone into Submittable, you've put all of your information in, you've hit submit well before 11:59 on March 1st. And then we get to see all of your wonderful work on the back end. The grants team here at Bread and Roses will screen each of the applications for those basic eligibility criteria that we talked about at the top of the call. So we are only passing through to the community members applications that meet the criteria, both the overarching Bread and Roses criteria, but also the specific criteria for each of the funds. So if your application gets passed through to the Giving Project, you're invited to have an interview with some community members. And again, what we're up to there is we're trying to give you another format to be able to share the information and story about what's up with your work. We're trying to understand that there can be brilliant organizers who may not have the time, bandwidth, energy, skills to write a beautifully polished written application, but they can show up in an interview and talk about their work and help the community have the right information to make the right choice that way. Once interviews are done, as Andriana talked about, the Giving Project stewards, the Giving Project staff helps the community members to decide how to distribute the dollars that are available. And then the Giving Project members make recommendations to Bread and Roses' board of directors about which groups to award grants to. And then the final step is that our board of directors reviews those recommendations and approves them, and my team disperses grants. So yeah, it's a little bit more, there is more processing on the back end after you hit apply than there are at a lot of other foundations. And so that leads me into letting you know what the timeline is. So again, here we are today at the info session. We will hold an application support session on February 27th, and that is intended to be more of a space where you've already logged into Submittable and you're like, oh, I have a question about how to fill out this question, or logistical questions about applications. So that's on the 27th. The deadline is March 1st. Those interviews I just talked about will happen in April and May, and the recommendations from Giving Project to the Bread and Roses board of directors will happen in June. And so once those recommendations get approved by the board, folks will hear about decisions and we'll get to the nitty-gritty of getting your agreement signed and payments pushed out the door. Here is a subset of the lovely humans who will ultimately be approving the recommendations from the Giving Project. And that's the end of our slides. Here's Lucas and I enjoying being of service to you all. If you have questions, you can reach all of the grants team at grants@breadrosesfund.org. That'll get to both Lucas and me. Our team is growing, so we'll also get to our new teammate as of next week. And if you have Giving Project questions, you can reach out to Andriana. Her email address is here as well. Hopefully that gave you a good base to get started on choosing which fund to apply to and getting started in Submittable, but I'm happy to answer any questions that brought up for folks. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in about 30 seconds when we get to questions so I can see more people's faces, but I'll give you a moment to take down email addresses if you like.
Lisa Joe had a question right before I posted the link.
Great. I'm scrolling up. Can we submit video and articles in support of our application? We do not right now accept like attachments. We do have one question that is, where do you post information online about your organization? And so that's a place where you could put a link to specific, if you wanted to draw our attention to specific things that are on the internet, you could put that there, but we don't have a way to accept attachments right now. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question.
Please.
Our organization is an organization that is striving to close the food insecurity gap of people of color. It's not really a social justice organization, but there are underlying reasons why people suffer food insecurity. And a lot of times it has to do with their economic standards and all the other racial things that go along. Would an organization like ours qualify for one of your grants?
If the work is solely, meeting that need, which I agree with your analysis of why that need exists, then it does not. But if you're using the food distribution as a way of bringing together community and understanding like the issues that are underlying the food insecurity and then pushing to change something to reduce food insecurity, that would qualify. So say while you're passing out your food, you are also, educating folks and saying like city council is holding a hearing on, I don't know, like zoning for grocery stores, or holding a hearing on, school lunch funding, and you're trying to activate folks to get into that that level of system change, that will qualify. But if it's again, not saying that feeding people is not good work, it's great work, but if it's simply that, if it's focused on that, then it doesn't qualify for Bread and Roses funding.
It kind of so somewhat, because we would do things like because we do home delivery service. There's not like, we're not out on the corner and just passing out food. And the people that we deliver to are primarily homebound or disabled in some way. We do educate them on changes that occur, changes in SNAP, and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, again, the thing that would tip you over into qualifying would be like if you were hearing from them changes they needed in SNAP and then pushing to get that change through, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions for us while we're all here together?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see me? Oh, okay. Wait.
Hope you cut out for 1 second there.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if I was on the video or not. I was trying to get on the video, but I don't know. But my question is there ever any a time where we might submit too much information? Like when we're answering questions about like how your organization started or list the activities, because I don't know if it was okay to put all the activities that we do, because it's just it's quite a bit, but I didn't know, sometimes I could get wordy, so I didn't know
Yeah.
if it was.
Yeah. Great question. I think there's two answers to that. One is that for each of the questions that we ask, there is a maximum word count, and we tried to make them so that they're spacious, right? We're not trying to make you have to like labor over cutting words out, but we tried to make them also so that you don't spend your entire waking day writing our application. So there is a word count for each of the questions. So yes, like you need to be within the word count. The other way I'll answer that is back to if your organization is doing a lot of things, I would be selective and choose the ones that are about building that base, you know, creating that collective power analysis and using that base of people to push systems and shift power. I would focus on those. Those are the ones that will qualify you for our funding. And so, you know, those are the ones that will be of interest as we're screening to see whether you qualify, and also will be of interest to the community members as they're making funding decisions. So that's how I would decide what to focus on.
Okay, Sarah, can you be a little bit more specific? When you said building-based power analysis
Mm-hmm.
and pushing systems, I just want to make sure that I have it. Can you just be a little bit more specific on what you mean?
Yep. So I would focus on the activities where you are building your collective community, right? So again, building the people with whom you're doing the work, right? So how are you bringing people into the work? Yeah, that's what I would say. I would focus on that, and then I would focus on how you are together with those people. Again, pushing whoever is holding power in the problem that you're trying to resolve, pushing those who hold power to shift something to resolve the problem.
Okay.